In Matthew 27:46 and Mark 15:34, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Muslims and other Unitarians attempt to use these passages to refute the Trinity or the deity of Christ by asking, did Jesus have a God? If he has a God, how can he be God? The problem with objections like this one is that they completely ignore the overall context of the Bible. It's a hermeneutical mistake to pluck one verse out of context and to read your own ideas into the text. As the old saying goes, context is king. So in this video, I want to give you 3 reasons why this objection fails based on the overall context of the Bible. Number 1, this wouldn't be the first time that God on earth worked in harmony with God in heaven. In Genesis 19:24, we're told that Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from Yahweh in heaven. The English translation of the Bible uses the word Lord here. It's Yahweh, the tetragrammaton, or the personal name of God. Yahweh means he will be. You see, God's existence doesn't depend on anyone or anything. He's a necessary being. Moreover, Exodus 3:15 tells us that Yahweh is the name of God forever and for all generations. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the tetragrammaton is translated into Greek as Krios, or again in English, Lord. And this is most often the term that is used to refer to Jesus in the New Testament. And it allows the author to make the distinction between the Father and the Son, 2 divine persons. Both are divine titles. In fact, I would say that the word Lord is a much loftier title than the term God. We also know that Jesus himself claimed to be God, according to John 10:33, and the Apostle Paul calls him God in Titus 2:13 and Romans 9:5. Yet we don't believe these are 2 different gods, or that the one on earth is anything less than the God in heaven. In both Judaism and Christianity, there is only one God, ontologically speaking. But biblically, Christians would say that the one God is multi-personal, hence the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so we don't have a problem with the Son praying or speaking to the Father in this way. It's just not a problem for us. But the second reason, I would say, is Jesus is quoting Psalm 22 here, which, by the way, was written 1,000 years before the incarnation, and it gives us precise details about how the Messiah would die. Long before crucifixion was even invented, this psalm tells us that his hands and his feet would be pierced. And of course, the opening statement of Psalm 22 is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So it's certainly possible that Jesus was pointing people to this Old Testament passage, which is all about himself. We know also from the Old Testament that the Messiah would be God. He would be God in flesh. Isaiah 9:6 tells us that his name would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. Even the Targum of Isaiah recognizes this truth. But not only does Jesus quote the opening statement of Psalm 22, he also quotes the final words of this psalm, saying, "It is finished." These were his last words. So surely these opening and closing statements would have brought great conviction upon those listening and familiar with this text. Psalm 22 verses 16 through 18 say, "For dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierce my hands and my feet. I can count all of my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." All of these things were being fulfilled right before their very eyes, and yet these events themselves were not orchestrated by Jesus. They weren't forced on the people by him. So once again, we see that this objection fails to consider the overall context of Matthew 27 or Mark 15. So lastly, number 3, in Jeremiah 33:26, God says, "I am the God of all flesh." And this certainly would apply to Jesus as the Word or Logos who became flesh and dwelt among us. We could even strengthen their objection with passages like John 20:17, where Jesus tells Mary, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not ascended to the Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God." Notice how Jesus uses the terms God and Father here interchangeably. Yet, again, this text is not a problem because the Father is distinct from the Son. They're not the same person. Both are called God in the New Testament, but it is the Son who humbles himself or lowers himself by taking on the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men, according to Philippians chapter 2. As the second Adam and perfect human being, Jesus came to earth and he lived the life that we should have lived, the life that we never could have lived. He prayed, was obedient to the Father, even willingly laid down his life, willingly laid down his human nature on the cross. So again, it should come as no surprise that while Jesus was on earth, he would occasionally refer to the Father as God. So 3 reasons that this objection fails to consider the overall context. The next time your Muslim friend attempts to use this fallacious objection, simply tell them that context is king and Jesus Christ is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. This is Olin Giles with Radical Truth. Until next time, blessings.